All right. This is 12 noon exactly. Um, so you are all welcome to today's webinar organized by the African Women's Cancer Awareness Association. My name is Chris Chukwunyere, and today we have a very important person that would be doing justice to the topic COVID-19, understanding the vaccine and how it can protect you. But before we go into introducing him, um, he's a very strong, very passionate, and very um, intelligent, resourceful person, very experienced as well, that will do justice to the topic. He has several years of experience, and I think it would be very nice for him to do the introduction himself. But before that, it would be nice to actually let you know um, the organization that is called African Women's Cancer Awareness Association. We were founded in 2004 as a nonprofit organization in the National Capital Region. And our mission is to develop solid partnerships that would work together to reduce the existing disparities in awareness, education, prevention, treatment, and care of breast cancer among African immigrant women, especially the medically unserved, underserved, and underprivileged. We do this through education and awareness outreaches, as well as specialized professional navigation services for screening, diagnosis, and treatment of breast cancer amongst African immigrant community. Now, over the years, we've been able to reduce the burden of cancer, on African immigrant families, and we've done this by ensuring that we help people to access quality health care. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've also tried over the year, to be able to not just reach African immigrants communities, but also African Americans, in the aspect of providing intervention programs based on COVID-19. So it's important that as an organization, we look at what the immediate need of our communities are and see how we can help, navigate the process to provide solutions to the problems that we are having. And we've been doing this in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and especially the Prince George's County. This is where we reside in terms of our office as well. And we, over the years, enjoyed partnership, enjoyed support from Prince George's County. And we've also tried as much as we can to reach this immediate community in terms of the services that we provide. And we're actually glad, to enjoy that partnership, with Prince George's County. So we'll go straight into the topic for today and see how we can answer as many questions as possible based on the topic COVID-19, understanding the vaccine and how it can protect you. All right, so I have here with me Dr. Jethro Ekuta. Dr. Jethro has so many years experience in the pharmacology department, and he's going to introduce himself and just let us know about his background and the different things that he has done over time. And we can now proceed from there. So Dr. Jethro, you're welcome to today's webinar organized by African Women's Cancer Awareness Association.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for inviting me to this forum. It's quite an honor that I have the privilege to share with this community, the little knowledge that I have about COVID-19 vaccines. So by way of introduction, I actually grew up in Nigeria, and I came to the US to attend graduate school. So I trained as a clinical pharmacologist. That is someone who understands how drugs and vaccines work in people. So that's my background. And I had a privilege of working for the US Food and Drug Administration, what we call the FDA, as a clinical pharmacology reviewer. A reviewer at the FDA is somebody who looks at documents that are submitted from pharmaceutical companies who are trying to get their products approved. You evaluate and determine if that product is safe and if it works, and what that balance is between safety and effectiveness. So I got a privilege to do that. Then I subsequently left the FDA and joined industry. And for the past 22 years or so, I've been working in different pharmaceutical companies. Some of the big name pharmaceutical companies you might have heard of: Pfizer, Sanofi, Bristol Myers Squibb, Procter and Gamble, I've Johnson and Johnson. So I've had a chance to work with them. Currently, I work for a company called Alexion, which specializes in developing drugs for rare diseases. We are also developing a drug for the treatment of COVID-19. So this is after someone has already become infected. We have a product we are developing to see how it can keep them from progressing to a more severe form of the illness. So I have a lot of familiarity with the area of COVID-19. I also am the president-elect of the Regulatory Affairs Professional Society. It is the largest society of its kind in the world. It has over 27,000 members. And we are the ones that help pharmaceutical companies to package their information and interact directly with regulatory authorities. So that's my brief background, and thank you again for the privilege.
Wow, thank you very much, sir. In fact, with this background, we know that we are in safe hands as far as dealing with this topic is concerned. So let's look at first of all, I think it's important that we look at because at the end of today, what we want to do is to ensure that people first of all understand or have enough knowledge about the COVID vaccine.
Yep.
See how effective it is in terms of how it can protect them. And most importantly, because we are also dealing with the Black community, we want to be able to ensure that people participate, in terms of assessing the vaccine and taking the vaccine. And we want to deal with the trust issues, that are existing amongst the Black communities. So first of all, let's go back into history, because I think and I believe that if anyone is saying that I don't want to take this vaccine, or I'm skeptical about it, there has to be valid reasons, or there has to be some information out there that is making someone hesitant to take the vaccine. So let's go into history. What would you say is the reason why Black communities are refusing or are hesitating to take the vaccine?
Absolutely. No, thank you for that question. If people are scared to take a vaccine that they believe the government has had a hand in developing, you cannot blame them, especially among the Black community. This fundamentally has to do with the issue of trust. If people don't trust that the system is working in a way that they find to be transparent, in a way that they feel they can rely upon, in a way that they feel they are being told the truth, then naturally they will be concerned and they will be hesitant. I will give you a very specific example of what has happened in the past that has eroded the trust, especially of the Black community. So, back many decades ago, this was essentially in the 1930s. There was an experiment that the US government, of all people, US government, conducted. This was in Tuskegee. And what they did, this had to do with a disease called syphilis, which is a venereal disease that, affected people at the time. There was no treatment at the time that this experiment was conducted in the 30s. And so when they went to Tuskegee, they told the men that they were conducting this experiment. I mean, that basically they had come to, see how the disease progresses and to treat them. So when people decided to make themselves available for that study, they were not told that some of them were, going to be monitored, just looked at without any treatment. And so they allowed these people to progress. The disease got worse. What they wanted to do was just understand the natural history of that disease, which is when it starts, when somebody is infected, what changes occur? How does it progress without treatment and that sort of thing? So, but the problem was that the people were not told that that's what this was about. They were basically told, we are giving you treatment, when in fact they were not being treated. Many of those people died. Many of those people developed disabilities. And I think the last of them actually died not too long ago. And so in the early, even what, I mean, to make it worse, there was actually a time that I think in the 40s, the 1940s, just a few years after this study started, penicillin was developed. Penicillin was a very effective treatment for syphilis. And they refused to give penicillin to these individuals. And so you can imagine people going about their life thinking they are getting treatment when in fact they were not. And even though there was an effective treatment, you refuse to give it to them because you are trying to study them. So essentially people felt that they were used as guinea pigs. But you know, the whole thing became blown up in the early 1970s when it became clear that for nearly 40 years, these people have been living with syphilis without treatment. Of course, there was a public outcry against that, but the damage had been done. That eroded trust, because now if the government comes to you and say, oh, we are doing something to help you, how then can you trust them? And so that's at the root of the distrust. Apart from this, there were several other things that happened in those times where, you know, people were not, you know, told what they were being used to do. That is called an informed consent. Just like if you go to the hospital and you are going to undergo surgery, the surgeon will sit down with you and say, this is the procedure you are going to undergo. These are the likely outcomes. There is a potential this could get worse or things could get better. And then you willingly sign a form that says, I understand what I'm going through and I accept to go through it. That's an informed consent. So today, that is no longer possible for people to be put into that type of study without signing an informed consent, because the law had to change as a result of that unfortunate incident that happened way back a few decades ago. So we're in a different environment now. But you know, that's at the bottom of the distrust among Black people.
Okay, so you know we're Africans, okay? So
Yep.
we also have some experiences, you
Mhm.
know, about things like this in
Yep.
Africa.
Yep.
So we also need to talk about it, because
Absolutely.
one of these organizations that have also developed this vaccine, you know, was also involved in it. I think it's important we talk about it so that we can actually have a very good understanding of
Yep.
where all of this is coming from.
Absolutely. No, Chris, you're right. There was you know, another unfortunate incident that happened in Nigeria, where Pfizer, a well-known company that also has one of the two vaccines that have been, you know, authorized right now, Pfizer went to Kano in Nigeria, which is in the northern part of Nigeria, and they basically went with a drug called Trovan. And this drug was supposed to be used to treat you know, meningitis, cerebrospinal meningitis, even polio. So, you know, what had happened was they administered, you know, they went to Kano, did not get an informed consent from people. They did not go through, there's usually an ethics review board that reviews something like this. When you are using experimental treatment on people, an ethics review board has to approve that particular study for it to proceed. None of that was done. And so the drug was given to people. You know, some of those people became disabled, some died. And that was because the drug was still an experimental treatment, meaning it hasn't yet gone through the usual regulatory approval process that will confirm the safety and efficacy and the risk benefit profile of that particular drug. So that again, you know, came to light a few years ago. I think the Kano state government settled it with Pfizer for what, maybe about $7 million, which is nothing, you know, if that were to be a situation here in the United States. you know that, I mean, that would be a serious issue. So yeah, so that again is another example of, you know, something being done to people without them being aware. And when people hear of these stories, then how do you expect them to respond? How can they trust, you know, the system? But hopefully as we go through this today, you will get a sense of why we can trust the current COVID vaccines and the things that have been put in place to, you know, the checks and balances that have been put in place.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Jethro, for bringing out those very important issues. So there are underlying factors; they are still there. Yeah, and
Yep.
no matter what we do, a lot of people will still believe that there is another, there's need for one not to trust
Yep.
what is going on. But I think that's why we are here, to be able to shed more light on things like this. So
Yep.
let's talk about the COVID-19 vaccine. Why is it different? Why is it
Hmm.
different from these other experiences that you shared so far?
Right. Yeah. So when we talk about COVID, you know that, you know, what has happened is this is a pandemic that hit everyone unexpectedly. And when it happened, it has so far resulted in so many deaths. And as a result, it is something that has touched so many people around the world. When the whole COVID, you know, pandemic became a reality, many companies have jumped in to try to develop a vaccine that would work, because at the end of the day, you know, many other disease outbreaks in the past, you know, have been contained, you know, like smallpox or polio or, you know, other types of diseases that we know about. The only way they've been put in check is through vaccination, through the development of vaccines and using those vaccines to vaccinate. So in the case of COVID, you know, many different companies, as I said, have jumped on the bandwagon, but they all have had to go through a normal regulatory approval process, which means that the vaccines have had to go through specific testing. And it's not just the company coming forward and say, take my word for it. There is now a robust regulatory approval mechanism when a company develops a drug or vaccine and wants it to be approved. In this case, the US government also directly got involved and pushed out billions of dollars to specific companies to be able to help them to develop the vaccines very quickly. But the platforms that were used to develop these vaccines are ones that they've been working on over many years. For example, Ebola, the Ebola vaccine, when Ebola happened, but around 2014, they already were using some of these platforms that are being used. So I will go into more detail, because I don't know what questions you have, but if they don't come up in the questions, I will go through them, to give you a basic understanding of how a vaccine actually works and what the regulatory mechanism is that to get that vaccine through development, registration, and distribution. So let me
So
pause and make sure that
yeah,
you are
yes,
getting
I
your
think
specific
that's the next
questions
question I
answered.
wanted to ask you,
Okay, all
because
right.
you talked about it, having to work on the existing platform,
Yeah.
which was Ebola. So because I was thinking was how come that usually it takes a longer time for a vaccine to be out, but it took a
Very
very
true.
short period of time for the
Yep,
vaccine,
yep,
to come out. So how do you explain this? So it'd be nice, first of all,
yep.
to let us know about this, and then now take us through the process of, production,
Yep.
approval, and distribution.
Absolutely. So, the fact that these vaccines have been developed so quickly is another reason that people are scared to take the
Exactly.
vaccine, because they feel that some steps have been cut out. That, in fact, is not the case. Steps have not been cut out. They've not taken shortcuts to avoid, making sure that the vaccines are safe and effective. What has essentially been done is a few things that accelerated this. First of all, the government put out a lot of money to make sure that some of the processes that used to take place in sequence, meaning you complete step A before you can go to step B. Now, some of those processes have been completed in parallel, meaning you could have 2 or 3 different processes that are running concurrently, but they are running concurrently at risk, right? At risk, meaning hoping that the sequential process still has to be followed to get the vaccines approved. But by doing some of those other processes that would have taken place much later at risk, it speeds up the process. And one of the key processes that is usually done toward the end is manufacturing. You don't manufacture a vaccine until you know that the vaccine works and that it is effective. But one of the things they've done is they've allowed manufacturing to take place at risk, hoping that the vaccines that were tested in people will eventually be the same material that they will need to mass produce for mass vaccination. Manufacturing by itself can take many years to get developed, but the fact that a lot of money was thrown out and many different companies work together jointly, there was a lot of collaboration among different parties that in the past maybe would have been competitors. Now they are all coming together because we all have a common problem and everybody wants that problem solved. So you push aside the competitive side of things and then try to do things. So manufacturing has been accelerated, and those vaccines were manufactured even before the studies to tell you that the vaccine works and is safe had occurred. We were fortunate in the sense that when those testings were actually done, it came out to be that the vaccines could be proved to be safe and effective. And so the manufacturing process that has been put in place can proceed. If it had turned out the other way around, that the vaccines that were tested didn't show that they were safe and effective, then all that money that was pushed into manufacturing at risk would have simply gone down the drain. But because of the seriousness of the disease, you just couldn't wait to do that sequentially. So that's one of the things that has sped up the process. The second thing that has made the process faster is the actual vaccine platform. We talk about vaccine platforms as the basis by which you create a vaccine. So let me actually walk you through briefly what a vaccine is to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Under normal circumstances, before we even talk about vaccines, our bodies have been designed to be able to fight against anything that invades that body that is not supposed to be a part of the body. We are exposed to a lot of germs on a daily basis, whether they are viruses, bacteria, fungi, whatever it is. Anything that's not supposed to be a part of the body, we're exposed to them immediately. Do you know that the largest organ that we have in our body is our skin? That's the largest organ, and the skin keeps away so many things from getting access into the body. That's actually the first line of defense against anything that is foreign to the body. But we do know that some of those things eventually make their way into the body, either because your skin has a cut, right? It exposes your internal parts, or you take something in through your mouth, or you breathe something through your nose. So those things eventually find their way into the body. When they get into the body, the way our body is designed is the body has a system called an immune system that is primed to conduct surveillance, which means it's constantly on the lookout. It's like having soldiers in your body that are protecting your borders and being on the lookout to see if there are foreign invaders. The moment they recognize something as foreign, they deploy mechanisms that are already in the body to try to attack that foreign agent and to either destroy it or to render it unable to infect you and cause illness. So that's a natural immunity. Now, those things that invade the body are called pathogens, and then those pathogens like bacteria or viruses, there are parts of them that actually trigger your body to develop an antibody against that particular pathogen. Now, these antibodies attack the specific parts of that pathogen, which is called an antigen. So the antigen is that part of the pathogen, a bacteria or virus that triggers the disease process, and your body mounts an attack against it. So then you have this antigen antibody interaction to try to destroy the agent and keep you safe. Vaccines work in exactly the same way. And in the past, the way they've been developed is either you use a whole, let's say you are talking of viral diseases, you take a whole virus and you do one of two things to the virus. Either you kill the virus using chemicals or radiation or other things so that the virus is no longer alive. But components of that virus, which I called earlier antigens, are still present in that dead virus. And it can trigger your body to develop an immune response. So when that is introduced into the body, then your body recognizes it as something foreign. It develops antibodies that immediately attack it. And at the same time, some of the cells in the body are primed to have a memory of that exposure. And now they are in attack ready mode, so that the next time they see anything that looks like that pathogen that first affected you, they mobilize the entire body to attack. It's like multiplying your number of soldiers to attack and destroy that thing effectively. And that's the way our immune system works to keep us safe, to keep us alive. So I was talking about the platforms. So you can use a live virus, a virus that is killed, and then you develop you develop vaccines from it. Or you can take the live virus and render it less potent. And you do that by passaging it through cells over a series of passages. As you take them through cells in cell culture, they become less and less powerful. Then now you can use that less powerful form of the virus to induce your body to produce antibodies. The problem with that is that sometimes the less powerful, the less potent virus can go back to its original form and actually cause disease. So that's not a very good thing, but that's the way that vaccines have been developed in the past. It takes time to do that. Another way that vaccines can be developed is just by taking a component of that vaccine. It could be a protein or a sugar, which are usually the antigens, not the entire organism, and then you can use that as the basis of vaccine. With the newer platforms, which is how COVID-19 has been developed, you now use one way is to use the nucleic acid. The nucleic acid is the basis of the genetic material, or what you call the gene. So you could take an entire gene. What genes do is that, so you have DNA, right? Everybody is familiar with the concept of DNA. So the DNA will take the information that it needs to make a protein. It transcribes that information to a messenger RNA, right? That process is called transcription. So it just takes the information, copies it onto messenger RNA. Then messenger RNA interprets that information and produces the proteins. That is called translation. So you transcribe the information from DNA to mRNA or messenger RNA. The messenger RNA translates that information into proteins and then makes the proteins. These proteins are what triggers all kinds of issues. It is these proteins that your body is mounting antibodies against. So what they've done in the case of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that are out there, they actually are using the messenger RNA. So it bypasses one process. Instead of the DNA doing the transcription, it's the messenger RNA that just needs to translate that information into protein. So by bypassing one of the steps, it makes things to go much, much quicker. And so this technology is not new. It's been developed over many, many years, but it has never really been used to produce a vaccine that is approved until now, when we had this emergency. So the process has been used, but the vaccines have had to go through the usual steps of registration, which is the next thing I would like to talk about. But before I do that, I want to take a pause to make sure that I answer any other question. Then I can walk you through the actual steps you go through in developing and commercializing the vaccine.
Yes, thank you very much for that information. It is very in depth. I think that we all need to hear these things, even if it means coming back to this webinar and watching it again to be able to understand it, because it is knowledge that gives you confidence to take an informed action. Okay, so it's important that you had to do this. So we will talk about government involvement and how the government can help, because when we don't trust the government, it is their responsibility to ensure that, they provide that environment for us to be able to participate or cooperate with them in terms of taking the vaccine, because it's for our collective good. So, but before we go into that, let's finish the process of
Okay,
production and
cool.
commercializing, and then
Yeah,
we can go into that, because those are real issues that, we really need to treat this afternoon.
absolutely. And I'll try to do this very briefly and very high level so that you'll be able to get to the other topics. So essentially, a vaccine development would start in the laboratory, right? Where what they've done with these vaccines is they are able to understand what the sequence of of the genetic material looks like, right? And instead of working with the live virus, which will require a very, a special building, special protective gear and everything, they just take the sequence and they are able to manipulate that in the lab. And so what you do is you test different things that you think are antigens, because the antigens are what trigger antibody formation. So you start out by doing that in the lab and having several of them. Then you pick one that you will want to develop. And so the process starts from the lab. An antigen is selected, and then it is tested in animals first. You are testing it in animals, one, to determine if it actually stimulates the development of antibodies, right? So once that is done and you're able to confirm that it stimulates antibody production, then you take it into human testing. And testing in humans goes in 3 different steps, what we call phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So in phase 1, you test in a small group of people, typically maybe about 20 people, just to see, yeah, we saw that this triggered an immune response in animals, but will it also trigger an immune response in humans, and whether it is safe? Those are the 2 questions you want to answer in phase 1. So you do in a small number of people. And then if your answer looks encouraging, you now go to phase 2. In phase 2, you are actually testing it on people that look like the people that will eventually use that vaccine when it is approved, right? So you are testing it, if you are testing it only, let's say, in males, then in phase 2, you only focus on males. If it is people of a certain age that are going to receive that vaccine, like in this case, they tested in people from age 16 in the case of the Pfizer vaccine, or age 18 in the case of the Moderna vaccine, all the way up through, more than, 75, 80 years of age, right? So that's the group. Children were not included at the beginning. So you test it in that population, but now you are testing in more people, typically, about 200 people or fewer, again, to see how people respond and to see, how safe it is. And then if that works, you now go to phase 3. Phase 3 is where you test it in a large number of people, sometimes in more than one country at the same time, and in a broad range of population, where you know that when this is approved, it's going to be taken by a wide range of people, either people that have certain diseases or people that may have certain things that didn't exist in phase 2. It is After you have done all that to determine if it works and how well it works, and if it is safe, then the company will have to package all that information. They gathered all the way from the bench when they were in the lab up through what they gathered in phase 3. They submit this to a regulatory authority like the FDA, right, or the World Health Organization. When this package gets to them, you have reviewers who will look at that package to determine independently of whatever the company has said. They want to answer 3 questions. Number 1, does it work? Number 2, is it safe? Number 3, is the balance between that safety and effectiveness good enough to use for this particular disease? That is called the risk-benefit balance. When they answer yes to each of those 3 questions, then they recommend for the product to be approved. In the US, for example, you have an independent body outside of the FDA called an advisory committee. This committee is made up of experts who may be in, colleges and universities, right? Who independently, they have no stake in what is being done. They are not the regulator, they are not the company, just independently evaluate to see if those 3 boxes can actually be checked if they were to look at it. And then they make their recommendation to the FDA, then the FDA decides to approve or not approve. So these vaccines have gone through the 2 vaccines that are out there now, the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine, not talking about the AstraZeneca vaccine because that's not yet approved in the US, but it is approved in Europe and elsewhere. They have had to go through these steps. And that is how the determination was made that they were safe and effective. I did a personal evaluation myself. I looked at the original data because as I told you before that I have been a reviewer at the FDA, so I know what to look for. And doing my own personal evaluation, I can also come to the same conclusion that these vaccines are effective, they are safe, and the risk benefit and the benefit outweighs the risk that comes with it. Of course, there's no such thing as 100% safety. Even the water we drink is not 100% safe, right? So it's a balance of how well are the risks I know, relative to the benefit I will get, which one outweighs the other. And that's what you have to look at.
Okay, so talking about the safety, from what you've said,
Yeah.
we have come to the conclusion that the COVID-19 vaccine have passed all of these checklists.
Yes.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
it is safe to be administered.
The vaccines are safe to be administered on the
All right.
basis of the data that have been gathered. You have
Yeah.
to know that, the Pfizer vaccine has already been tested in more than 40,000 people. And the Moderna vaccine has been tested in more than 30,000 people. So that's a lot of people. That is how you collect this initial information about safety and effectiveness. What was found primarily in terms of the safety, let's talk about the effectiveness first. The 2 vaccines are more than 90% effective. What that means is, if it is given to 10 people, at least 9 of those 10 people will be protected, right? They will not come down with COVID-19, right? That is well established. And it's actually close to 100%. And when this vaccine was given to people, in those like 30,000 people that I talked about, probably I think it was only 1 person out of like 30,000 that developed the severe form of COVID after receiving this vaccine. That is remarkable that you
Yeah.
give this to 30, 40,000 people and none of them practically developed severe COVID, because COVID occurs at different levels. Severe, you go from asymptomatic where there is no symptom at all, your body handles it, you go your way, to mild, where you start showing a few things like, oh, I have headache, I just don't feel well, I have fever, but I don't need to go to the hospital. I don't need to be hospitalized. And then you go to moderate, where you may now start having a little bit of difficulty breathing, but still is manageable, you don't need to be kept in the hospital. Then to severe, where now you absolutely need to be in the hospital because your oxygen level has dropped. You can't maintain enough level of oxygen on your own without external support, without additional support for oxygen. Then to the critical, where now different systems of your body, your kidneys, your lungs, your liver, your heart, they are all thrown into commotion. And that's when people are likely to die. This is when you need, a breathing tube inserted into you. You can no longer breathe on your own, basically. And you're in critical care. That's when you are fighting between life and death. So when these vaccines were given, nobody progressed to that critical stage. Nobody progressed to the severe stage. They might have had a few mild stuff, but that's a good thing. If it's no longer killing people with the vaccine, that is a good thing. And so that's what we can say about those, about the effectiveness. In terms of the safety, the most common side effects that have been found are things like pain at the injection site. Of course, if you puncture somebody with a needle, it's like running outside, and then with your bare foot, and you step on, a piece of sharp object that you weren't aware of. You're going to feel pain, right? In some cases, there's swelling at the site of the puncture, at the site of the injection. In some cases, there's redness. So for people whose skins are lighter, you may find a little bit of redness. Some people experience fever, they develop fever. These are all similar to the signs of COVID, right? Mild.
So we are talking
COVID.
about the side effects now
The
of the
side effects,
vaccine.
yep. I'm talking about
Great.
the side effects now, yep.
Great.
So some people develop fever, some, lost their tastes, or smell, sense of smell. Some people developed malaise, which is just generalized feeling of, I just don't feel good, I don't feel well. Some people had congestion, right? Some people had muscle pain and aches, and some people had diarrhea, some people had vomiting, but none of these things are that serious when you compare that to developing COVID, which has serious consequences. Now, the most severe side effects that have been found is allergic reaction. So that is an immediate reaction to, to something that maybe your body wasn't used to, right? In that allergic reaction, it can show up as, massive swelling around your face, around your neck, so that you find it difficult to breathe or to swallow something. But the good news about that is there is epinephrine. You have heard of EpiPen that some people carry around, people that have allergies. Everyone who has developed allergic reactions so far has been successfully treated and managed with epinephrine. And it's only a very few people, like 1 out of 11,000 people that receive this vaccine may develop that allergic reaction. So this is how you determine the benefit risk balance I was talking about earlier. If you look at the risk of COVID, there's a potential that somebody could die. About maybe 1.6% of people will die of this disease. That means more than one person, roughly between 1 and 2 people out of every 100 that gets the disease will die. And you compare that to, having a headache, having vomiting for 1 day, you can live with that. You can say that the benefit outweighs the risk. So that's how they've come up with that determination. So vaccine is very highly effective with minimal or mild safety side effects for the most part.
All right. Thank you very much for elaborating on that. And it's also good that we've talked about the side effects, because it was also one of the questions I was going to ask. So let's look at the responsibility of the government in terms of trying to ensure that the Black community participates in taking the vaccine. Yep. Because we can do all of this. The government can put a lot of money into the vaccine production process and everything, and you distribute it to the communities, and the people don't turn out. Yeah. So what are those things that the government can actually do as also a means to ensure that trust is also built and people can actually determine, to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to take this vaccine because I've seen this done, that done, and I can trust the government that their effort is to my own benefits.
Yep. No, I think the government has been, trying to do all they can to help educate people. That's the reason when turn on your TV and go to some of the networks, you find government representatives like, the head of the NIH allergy, he comes on, he talks. You saw Joe Biden and Kamala Harris receive the vaccine in public. They are trying, they were trying to do that to let people know, look, we trust this, we believe it is safe, we believe it is good. So if I can take it, you should be willing to take it. And then the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they issue updates on what is going on, what has been approved, what people can take, what you shouldn't take, right? The World Health Organization is doing the same thing. They have information on their website. So government is using all of these various tools to help educate people. Now, when you talk about the Black community, some of the things that have to be done beyond those general things the government is doing is really sending people to the communities to directly engage with them. For example, a lot of these people attend churches. If you have people who can, speak through their church outlets to help educate them, if you have people organizing this type of forum that you have organized, where you specifically have somebody that looks like them, like myself, talk to them, it's more likely for people to trust someone that looks more like them than someone who looks different from them. So if you can have, those type of sessions, you have to use the multi-pronged approach, right? Go to their communities. If you are going to vaccinate, also set up vaccination centers within their communities where they don't have to travel long distances in order to get the vaccines. Then use people that look like them to be the ones giving them these vaccines, right? Because again, it encourages greater trust as opposed to the distrust that we talked about earlier. So I think there are things that the government can do, but it's very difficult for people to trust a government where there has been significant distrust. So now we need to have more people, and going forward, even for developing this type of vaccines, we want, Blacks or others, African Americans, Blacks from the diaspora, they should be part of the clinical investigators. These are doctors and other people that are involved in helping to give this drug to people that are in clinical trials. You need to have, people that have the knowledge of this space that are also Blacks that can be participants. And I think those are the ways we can start to influence and change minds and encourage. And so, if there is distrust, the only mechanism is to rebuild trust. And trust doesn't come overnight. It comes in one day. My personal appeal to everyone that may be listening to me today is that the COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective, and they are a much better option to take than the alternative of taking the risk of developing the disease, because we know that Blacks in general have had a greater share of the number of deaths. And I want to categorically say it's not because there is anything in the genes of Blacks that make them more susceptible. Absolutely nothing to do with that. It has to do in some cases because some of the people may have what we call comorbidities. These are other diseases that they have, like diabetes, like being overweight, like having high blood pressure, or or they are cancer survivors, or people with some other immune-mediated diseases. It could be people that have HIV. So what is happening is because they already have comorbidities, they are more likely to suffer the severe forms of this disease. And that's why, we are seeing the discrepancies in the number of deaths. And given all of these deaths, it doesn't make any sense for us to not take the vaccines when they become available, because we clearly know that the vaccines can prevent death and the severe form of COVID.
Thank you very much, sir, for that enlightening information. Because I also wanted to just ask something, because based on what you were talking about, would you say that there are gaps, or what are the identified gaps that you've seen in terms of government efforts to be able to encourage Black people to participate in taking the vaccine?
Yeah. So the identified gaps, straightforward. First one is just lack of adequate information that is specifically targeted to these populations. It's one thing to talk about information in general, like on TV, if you go to a network like CNN, that's not specifically targeted to, Black people. It's everyone, right? And if people are getting their information just from CNN or Fox News or some other channel, it doesn't really directly address them. So a huge gap is, how can we come up with an educational program that is specifically targeted to the population of interest? That is a gap. I've not seen a lot done in that space to try to bridge that gap. There need to be people out there, like I said, within the communities themselves, that are helping to educate, that are helping to answer the questions that people have, and in a way that people can trust the people who are talking to them. So that's a gap that, so right now there is actually an effort. I think it's maybe about 2 weeks ago, Meharry Medical College, which is a historically Black medical institution. I had the privilege of spending part of my time there. There are other historically Black medical colleges that are coming together to say, look, let's do something about what is going on by talking to our communities. So it will take more than just the government. It will have to take these types of people as well, who can connect better with their communities and educate. So to me, I think those are the greatest gaps that I see that have not yet been closed.
Okay, thank you very much for that. With what you've been saying, I keep thinking about the efforts that non-profit organizations like ours have been doing within the communities to be able to bridge some of these gaps in terms of the COVID-19. And for this year, one of the things that we've decided to do, because we've been doing a lot of education and awareness around COVID-19 prevention and all of that, and trying to see how we can actually reach out to these communities. We are like them. The Black Americans, the African immigrants, we look like them. We have a lot more information. We should be able to share this information and let them know that, what, COVID-19 is real, it is killing people, and these are the things that you must do. And even for the breast cancer community, we'll be able to try to see how we can, ensure that we help them through the process, because there's COVID-19 that is existing. This is a vulnerable population. They're immunocompromised. There's still that need to provide that support for them. Transportation for some of these people, logistics, from taking them to the hospital is another thing. So we've been doing some of these things, engaging with stakeholders, over the past 1 year to just ensure, that we get out that information to our communities. And we've had this support from, government institutions like Prince George's County, like the DC government, to provide funding to say, okay, what, we may not be able to have access to these communities because they may not trust us, but they trust you because you've been working with them for the past 10 years, for the past 16 years. So having access to them, it's easy to be able to implement these programs that can ensure that there is cooperation, there's participation among these people. So as we just kept talking, I'm like, okay, these are things, gaps that we've identified, and we've been filling these gaps to ensure that, we provide that level of support that we need, and to achieve the ultimate goal, to just ensure that this virus, we have that herd immunity and everybody is fine at the end of the day. So now there were some of the vaccines, like the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine. I saw on social media, and you would see not to be distributed outside the US, outside Europe. And for people who are in Africa or who are from African descent, who have families back home in Africa, they are thinking, so what happens to, my people? So what would you, first of all, the first question would be, was the Black community in terms of the process of providing this, of developing this vaccine, were they adequately represented? That's the first question. And then the second question would be, were Africans outside the US even represented in the production process?
Right. No, very good question. So very quickly, the simple answer is yes, Blacks were represented. Historically, when clinical trials are done, usually only 2% of Blacks are represented in those clinical trials. But in the case of COVID, it's close to 10% of the population. So when I talked about 30,000 people or 40,000 people being tested for these vaccines, about 9 to 10% of those were Blacks, which is way more than the representation we have ever received in the past. So, and I think the government specifically mandated that, because if you are going to tell people to take the vaccine, that's exactly one of the questions you are going to ask. People that look like me, were they represented in those trials? And so with a 10% representation, I think that is great. And the good news is when you look at the data by race or by those ethnic characteristics, there is no difference in the effectiveness or the safety of the vaccines, meaning that it was shown to be just as effective in Blacks as any other ethnic group. And it was shown to be as safe in those populations, just like any other races. So there is no difference at all, which is good news. It means that we don't have to worry, because there are many drugs that we know Blacks and whites respond to differently because of certain genetic compositions that we have. But in the case of these vaccines, none of that. And the two vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, are exactly the same platform. So, everything about them, that's why both their safety, their effectiveness, very, very similar. You can almost transpose them, to each other. But where many Blacks in the diaspora represented, the data we have seen did not specifically break down like Blacks in the diaspora versus African Americans. They are grouped simply by Blacks / African American. So if there was participation, that subset was not specifically looked at. But for the most part, you can have the assurance that because some Blacks were represented, it is fairly representative of all Blacks. So that's number one. The other thing, in terms of accessibility to these vaccines, how can people, for example, who are living in Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, Kenya, how can they get access to these vaccines? This is where the WHO comes in. There is an establishment called COVAX, and this COVAX is a conglomeration of private people like Bill Gates that are contributing, different governments that have subscribed to, contribute to the effort of the WHO, and a host of, the US is contributing to that as well. Individuals that, want to contribute money. So through this COVAX, eventually, these vaccines will be made available to third world countries to have access to it, because right now, the vaccines are very expensive if they were to be shipped, elsewhere outside of these so-called developed countries where they were originally developed, because their governments, like the US government, as I said at the beginning, pumped a lot of money into developing. So they first have to take care of the people for whom they were originally developed before they can go elsewhere. But there are vaccines like the one by Novavax that is coming, which can be stored, almost at regular refrigerator temperature, because the cold chain is part of the challenge too, getting these vaccines out to some, third world countries. If you have to store a vaccine at -70 degrees Celsius, that is so cold, and if you break that cold chain, which means all the way from where you manufacture it until that vaccine is given to people, you have to maintain that cold chain. If you don't, it destroys the effectiveness of that vaccine and even its safety. And so, you need vaccines that can be stored at warmer temperatures without them getting spoiled. And the good news is there are other platforms coming, even the Johnson & Johnson, you only need a single dose. So these are all ways that eventually they will make their way to these countries. But right now, many of these vaccines have not been accessible to
Okay,
those
Dr.
countries.
Jethro, thank you very much for that. So we have someone who, S. Darcy, that's the name I'm seeing here, who wants to make a comment. And you have the floor, S. Darcy.
All right. I am Dr. Sylvia Dassi, the African Diaspora Liaison in Prince George's County. And thank you very much, Mr. Chris, as well as Dr. Ekuta for the wonderful presentation, and to the African Women's Cancer Awareness Association for organizing this webinar, because indeed a message like this is what our community needs. And as the diaspora liaison for the county, and especially now that the COVID-19 vaccination is at a priority, is a top priority in every local and county government, I have been tasked to carry this message forward into our community. And just like how you said, Dr. Ekuta, that we need people of our own to go into our community to provide this information and to let them know that this vaccine is safe, so they can be administered for the global effort to reach herd immunity. So first of all, I just want to inform you that I will be reaching out to you, because what the Prince George's County is working on right now in my office is to develop a culturally competent educational material that we can disseminate in our community. Because when we speak, I come from a science background, by the way. I have a doctorate in human genetics, so I was able to understand what you were saying, even at the level of a layman's language at the 6th grade level. But for some people, that is too high, especially if they are not from a science background. So what we are working on is to bring experts from our community that can look at the educational materials that the federal government has prepared, and then tailor it to a language that our people will understand, and then translate that educational material in different languages based on the profile of the African community within the county, so that we can disseminate that information in churches, in grocery stores, in cultural meetings, wherever our people gather. And then secondly is to develop about a 3 minutes educational video where we address our people in our language. Because when we present ourselves to our community, first of all, they recognize us, they identify us. And when we speak a language that they understand, they tend to be receptive to us and open up to the information that we are transferring to them. So we are looking forward in developing a 3 minutes video where we can also disseminate that in clinics. We have physicians in our community that have private clinics, and the video can be aired in the waiting room, on the TV in the waiting room, so that when patients come in and sit, and while they're waiting to see the doctor, they can also listen to that. Then I just wanted to ask a question. As far as the COVID vaccine is concerned, is it going to be a one, or let me say 2-dose vaccination, or is this going to be something like the flu where we are encouraged to take it every season?
Yeah. No, thank you very much for all of those comments, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can. To specifically answer your question, we do not have that answer today. The reason being that, because it's been, it has only taken a short period of time to go through the regular testing. As a matter of fact, the studies that were relied upon to authorize the ongoing, these vaccines that are already authorized, those studies are still ongoing. Remember, I talked about phase 3. Those studies are still in phase 3. Right? So the information was extracted because there is such a high sense of urgency to put something out there that can help people. You can't wait until phase 3 is completed. So it will take a while to complete, and then those individuals have to be monitored. The people that were in the trials have to be monitored for a period of about 2 years, right? And also the people that are taking the vaccine now, there is a mechanism to collect, to follow up on them on any safety issues over a period of time. And with time, that's when you can tell. What we know right now is that the vaccine can be effective for a few months, but because it's not been monitored for long enough, we don't know how far those months can go. It could be every 6 months you need another vaccine, could be every year, could be every 2 years. It may, be more like the flu vaccine where you have to, to get one every year. We just don't know yet, but in another year to 2, that question will be answered because there would have been the passage of time that allowed you to gather the data as to how long the immune response goes on. But right now, the time is too short to be able to definitively answer that question.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Chris, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Darcy. We appreciate your support, cooperation with the organization. Okay, so
I'm a bona fide member. No, I just want to say I'm a bona fide member of AWCA.
Awesome. Yes, we do. And there's also that need to always appreciate that fact. We don't take it for granted at all.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so Dr. Jethro, we are 1 hour. In fact, this is 1 hour 7 minutes. So it was supposed to be just for 1 hour. But I have just one question. Sure. I think somehow you've been able to answer it somewhere. But the question says, I have a question. Given the level of mistrust and fear within the Black community, what would you recommend that we do? As stakeholders, as nonprofit organizations, what do you recommend that we do?
Yeah, I think what we need to do are some of the things you're exactly doing. For example, this session that we have, if you can find a way to make it available to a broader group of people, those who would have wanted to join today but couldn't join, that would be something to do. I think it boils down to 2 things. Figure out a way to educate the community. And I think Dr. Darcy mentioned a lot about some of the things they are doing, either through use of video, through use of brochures, making those available, either at the local clinics that these people attend or places where they gather for worship, like in churches, or their community centers where they do other things. Make those pieces of information available to people there. One area that I think is important is creating an infrastructure where people can ask questions in real time, right? And there is a way for those questions to be answered. I think that's one huge gap right now, that a lot of people may have questions, but they don't know who to ask. They don't know where to go to. If there's a way, whether it's, a radio mechanism, a podcast, TV, whatever it is, that can be created that allows people to ask questions, and then you can have experts who are able to answer those questions in real time. I think that will be, a game changer if we can do those things. But at the end of the day, it's really getting information to people and whatever mechanisms we can use to do that, and giving them an opportunity to have their questions answered. I think that's what we can do to make a big difference.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jethro. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take more questions. Personally, I have so many questions to ask, but the good thing is I've looked at the chats here. We just had this one question, and Dr. Darcy, who also asked a question. So I would hand over to Miss Ife. Miss Ife is she's the president and founder of AWCAA, and I'm very sure that she would like to make, 1 or 2 comments before we round up. Over to you, Miss Ife.
Okay, thank you very much. First, Dr. Jethro, for being with us this afternoon. And thank you, Mr. Chris, for being such a wonderful moderator. I'm particularly glad to see the list of participants today because we have a representative of the Mayor's Office on African Affairs in the District of Columbia. And then you can hear from Dr. Darcy, who is from Prince George's County. So the bottom line from the wonderful presentation we just listened to is to be able for all of us as a community to come together. I noticed also on the list of participants, the Pacha Foundation, who is another group of non-profit. So we're all from different communities. But once we know that this particular COVID-19 affects everybody across the board, then we need to come together to see how best we can fight it in our community. And so I'm glad that we're all coming through. We are blessed with experts like Dr. Jethro. We have listened to everybody's comments, so we're going to continue to try to do the best we can to, one, to let our community understand what this is all about. Two, to allay that fear, remove the fear that this vaccine is good for us. And so we thank you for your time. We hope when we call you again, you'll be willing to come join us. So we've enjoyed it. Thank you to all the participants. And hopefully we'll see you again in another session. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Jethro, for giving the time to do this. We really, really do appreciate you. I can see Pacha Foundation. Thank you, Stella Maris. Stella Maris connected us to Dr. Jethro, and we really appreciate that. And that's the partnership and collaboration amongst nonprofits, within our community that we all encourage. We thank every one of you from Prince George's County, from the Mayor's Office in DC, everyone who has participated. Also to our Facebook friends online, we also do appreciate you because this is also streamed on Facebook. So we really appreciate every one of you. If you have some more questions, you can put them in the comment section on Facebook, and then we can always get Dr. Jethro to reply and we post them, and we also can reply as well. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you everyone for your time. We really appreciate you guys until we will come your way next time, because we will continue to do this. We will keep educating, we'll keep informing to ensure that we achieve the aim that we desire. All right, thank you everyone, and take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.